to welcome all of you, wherever you are, for this session of our AI Tech and Policy Talks, AITPT. And for those of you who join us for the first time, AITPT is an initiative of our Digital Law Center that has the mission to present and discuss cutting-edge issues dealing with the multiple aspects of AI tech and policy. And today it's our great pleasure to welcome Dr. Sivan Tamir, who is Policy Counsel and Senior Research Fellow at the Israel Tech Policy Institute. And Sivan Tamir will speak today about the extremely important topic of the use of AI tools in the context of social welfare services in what is called the digital welfare state. And as usual, for our AITPT sessions, the presentation by our speaker today, Sivan Tamir, will be followed by comments on the presentation that will be made by two distinguished commentators. And today, our two commentators are Dr. Limor Shmerling Magazanik, who is the Managing Director at the Israel Tech Policy Institute and consequently works with Sivan Tamir. And it's a great pleasure for us and for me to welcome Sivan and Limor for this session and to interact with the two of you and with the Israel Tech Policy Institute today and hopefully also in the future. And our second commentator is Professor Diego Kuonen from the Geneva School of Economics and Management here at the University of Geneva. Diego Kuonen is also on the board of the Digital Law Center, which is why he's kind enough to put in the background also our logo of the Digital Law Center, for which I thank him. And Diego Kuonen is an expert in data science, so he will share with us also a non-legal perspective on this issue, which is obviously of critical value. And we will then open up the virtual floor for discussion with the participants, with our speakers and our commentators. In terms of logistics and also for the sake of organization, please note that this session is recorded and will be made available online so that people who are not with us today will have the opportunity to watch it later on the Digital Law Center website. Without further ado, let me wish you all a very stimulating AITPT session, and let me now give the virtual floor to Sivan Tamir for her presentation. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Jack, for this lovely introduction. I shall now just share my presentation and then we shall start. Right. Okay, so again, thank you, Jack, for this invitation to present our recent work looking into the various ethical challenges and policy implications of implementing algorithmic decision-making systems in government while focusing on the social welfare field. This topic is essentially about the intersection of the fourth industrial revolution and the public sector. On its face, a seemingly unnatural blend of two dynamically opposite things: innovation-driven artificial intelligence and the technology-skeptic, not-so-agile public sector. But it is exactly this unnatural combination that we find both appealing, worthily challenging, and meriting attention, particularly given the inherent vulnerability of the target population of social welfare clients and the sensitivity of decisions affecting them. And indeed, there seems to be a growing trend of integrating sophisticated predictive AI and data-driven technologies into the administration of various governmental services, such as immigration and refugee systems, education, health, law enforcement, and the criminal justice system, all to support more efficient decision-making. Interestingly, the most prevalent arena of ADM systems implementation is that of social welfare services, thus earning the term the digital welfare state. In the UK, for instance, 1 in 3 councils use algorithmic decision-making tools in social welfare systems. Now, ADM systems are typically implemented in 2 key areas of social welfare services. The first is determining benefits eligibility by replacing casework with an algorithm and requiring welfare clients to submit their benefit applications remotely, and by actively seeking to detect social fraud in a variety of benefits programs. The second area is that of child protective services, where algorithms are used to identify and flag children at risk for abuse, target families for early intervention, prevent the exploitation of children and young people, and also to identify geographical areas prone to juvenile delinquency in order to redirect youth work support services. So as I've hinted at the outset, this intersection of public sector and ADM system raises a few challenges, quite a few. Yeah. So I should now introduce four categories for those challenges. The first one is a technology development and implementation challenge, where we're mainly looking at insufficient in-house government technological expertise, which in fact forces the government to outsource its mission, sometimes its power, in order to private vendors in order to develop and implement ADM systems. The second prominent problem is that of digital illiteracy of social welfare clients, and also technological illiteracy or insufficient technological literacy within social workers themselves. The second set of challenges is a legal or regulatory one, and it refers mainly to the fact that AI governance is still in its infancy. We're particularly dreading potential incompliance of ADM systems or the introduction of AI into the public sector and existing administrative law principles such as transparency, privacy, due process, and equal protection. Another thing is that of the legal status of AI. Until AI will be designated with recognized legal status, such as a digital or electronic personality, it is not clear who exactly will be accountable and responsible for any AI-related harm, and we'll touch upon this subject a little in a few moments. Another set of challenges is the ethical aspect of things, where we're looking into the tension of human and machines, particularly around the issue of values. We're not sure, we're not certain or confident that we will be able to appropriately introduce or integrate human values into machines. And this leads to the fear of a dystopian algocracy, namely the rule by digital code or algorithm. The last set of challenges is a social one, which is actually a concretization of the former challenge, where we're looking into, in the social context, into the non-reciprocal relationship between human and machine, especially around the prospects of losing human control, human redundancy in the labor market, and so on. So what are the ethical difficulties and perhaps also limitations which we are looking into when we looking into this intersection of ADM and public sector? So there are a few specific difficulties and limitations which we are going to concentrate upon. The first thing is that ADM systems are, of course, inhuman. Therefore, they lack important human qualities such as compassion, nuanced emotional intelligence, solidarity, and other qualities which are so very crucial for certain. And we're afraid that perhaps ADM systems will not be able to incorporate. Another highly prominent ethical difficulty is that of non-explainability and black box problem, namely the difficulty in explaining and predicting complex algorithmic behavior or decision-making logic, particularly once the system becomes independent through machine learning as a semi-autonomous creation. This leads to objective algorithmic opacity, that is, the challenge of explanation is so great that even algorithm developers themselves or experts in the field will find it difficult to explain the inner workings of the algorithm. Subjective algorithmic opacity occurs where private vendors claim proprietary interest or commercial confidentiality over the algorithm and are reluctant to disclose how it actually works. Non-transparency and non-explainability, in fact, impede affected individuals' due process rights and hamper human auditing, judicial review, and most importantly, create a challenge for government accountability. Now, I think it was 2 sessions ago, Jack, if I'm not mistaken, that I took part in a session where we talked about the challenge of explainable AI. So here we're looking at this challenge. A partial solution for that could be in the form of a governmental proactive prerequisite for basic technical transparency when initially contracting with private vendors, so that intellectual property rights will not stand in the way to algorithmic transparency. Another challenge or difficulty here is that of uncertainty and inconsistency of outputs, supplemented by the non-interpretability or non-explainability of ADM. This tends to create citizen distrust, which is highly undesirable, of course. Also, in terms of responsibility and accountability, as we said earlier, when I refer to the legal challenges, we are looking into a potential multi-players accountability picture here. We have various potential players, developers and programmers, private vendors, the governmental entity which has outsourced this mission, and the social workers themselves. All can be accountable, but it is not clear to which degree and who is in fact responsible for any AI or ADM resulting harm. Another thing is AI error. While we know that the incidence of AI error is far smaller than that of human error, the scale of AI error is far greater than that of human error. Take, for example, Australia's Robodebt scandal. Between the years 2016 and 2019, Australia has implemented an automated system, replacing the formerly manual one, for detection and recovery of overpayment to welfare recipients. The system has issued hundreds of thousands of false or incorrectly calculated debt notices, resulting in great financial and emotional distress and a tsunami of suicides. After being legally challenged twice, you can see here in 2019 and 2020, the Australian government has agreed to alter the debt calculation method and settled out of court to refund payments made and additionally compensate affected individuals with a further settlement payment. Another thing is that of autonomy. While we know that individuals, in this case social welfare clients, do not have the opportunity to opt out or not refuse to be subject to an ADM system. So this, of course, infringes upon their autonomy in many respects. Privacy concerns arise when the government, in fact, has to make large data sets containing personal, highly sensitive information concerning social welfare clients to private vendors in order for them to develop those systems. And another problem, I think it's one of the most highly cited problems, is that of AI bias. We're talking about data bias, that is historical bias within the algorithm due to selective targeting and unrepresentative collection of data, and also bias within the developers themselves, who are, some would argue, they're ill-diversified. This all leads to algorithmic stigmatization, which can cause discrimination. The question here we should ask ourselves is whether AI bias is in fact smaller or less than human bias, which is in fact embedded into the data upon which the algorithm is trained and operated. We can see here an example of a prediction model used to proactively identify abuse within families for placing children who were taken out of their families. And this was implemented in Allegan in Pittsburgh. But the problem here was that there was bias in disproportionately targeting poor families when they looked into this, when they applied this prediction model. This relied extensively on means tested programs, and it observed all sorts of factors which it did not observe in higher means families, such as mental state or drug abuse within those families. And all this created a sort of a correlation between poor families and high risk for child placements, which Virginia Eubanks termed a digital poorhouse. Now, the implementation of ADM systems can arguably compromise a host of human and civil rights and put those at risk. We can see here, perhaps it's a non-exhaustive list of rights, but the last rights marked in brown, the right to social justice, the right to equality, we talked about algorithmic bias, and also the newly designated GDPR right, the right not to be subject to a decision based solely on automated processing, which can impede what Citron terms technological due process. This represents the fear of automated arbitrariness. Now, all these rights, or some of these rights, can be compromised with the implementation of certain ADM systems. Naturally, and we wouldn't be here if AI systems or ADM systems would not also have quite a few advantages and benefits which are worth this implementation effort of those systems in society. So the first one, the first advantage we can look at is the one of objectivity and neutrality. We're talking here about an automated process, a scientific one basically, which generates algorithmic outputs which are arguably bias-free. All this, of course, enhances public trust in the government which implements those tools. In terms of accuracy, the ADM systems and AI in general, of course, provides for incredible precision, and highly accurate predictions can come out of the implementation of those systems. And also if we properly code it, the AI error rate can be far smaller than that of human error rate. Another thing is responsibility. There are those who argue that the very development and implementation of ADM systems by the government is in fact an act of responsibility, a manifestation of responsible governance, which provides for uniform, effective, and consistent treatment across populations. Also, these systems can promote efficiency and maximize benefits to provide the greatest welfare for the greatest number of people through the generation of better forecasts and predictions. And lastly, but most importantly, perhaps, no, sorry, this is not the last point. My most important point is at the end. Those systems can be proactively applied to provide for risk flagging, monitoring, and for early detection, and therefore minimize harm, even if not prevent it in the first place. It's also very useful for policymakers, who can sandbox various policy options before they implement it and go live with it. Another thing is that the government can customize this service and provide better targeting while applying those systems. And they also allow for distributive justice, promoting social justice, and providing egalitarian treatment across population in a harmonized manner. So this was the last point of the advantages, which is most important, perhaps. The professional benefits it can offer to social workers or workers in any other governmental field. We know that ADM systems can automate repetitive tasks, thus relieve overload, and allow for resource allocation, for human resource allocation. That is, the systems can tackle automated prone tasks and leave the let's say other tasks which require human qualities such as compassion and empathy to social workers themselves, which will be more will have more time to deal with them. Some would say that the introduction of these systems into the professional field, in fact, empowers those working alongside these systems in what is termed as augmented intelligence. This is also what is being claimed about working alongside robots, for instance. This is, in fact, a counter-argument to the more traditional argument or fear of human redundancy or professional de-skilling while working around in an environment where AI has been introduced into. And there's also a fear of automation bias, which is the propensity to attribute more correctness to automated decision and thereby undermine professional confidence in human decisions. So, obviously, I will not even say arguably, I think we all agree that the introduction of these systems into governmental services and other services will become more prevalent. It is in fact inevitable. So what do we recommend that governments should do? So the first two stages are part of anticipatory governance. That is, the government is trying to predict what it's like. The government is conducting a sort of its own impact assessment program before even before designing the system itself. So the pre-adoptive stage, the government will perform a feasibility study to look into existing human alternatives and to examine various risks and costs which can be derived from the implementation of this technology. Another thing is for policymakers to be ready with a justification for opting for the introduction of such systems into the government. They have to ask themselves, how exactly is the implementation of this system is going to improve the existing system, the human-based model already in place, and will the impact of the introduction of such a system will be a proportionate one? Also, the government should provide a sort of a proactive examination of algorithmic equity and fairness. This can be done through bias transforming metrics to make sure that the developers are diversified, conducting an algorithmic impact assessment before or in the first stages of development and outsourcing the development. The second stage, again, within this anticipatory governance move, is that of design and adaptation for implementation of those systems, where the government has to provide a non-digital option for a given service. This correlates with the digital illiteracy of many social welfare clients. It also has to, or it has the opportunity to personalize those systems, namely to decide whether the system's role, the AI role, will be an assistive one, a decision support system, or a replacive one, taking human out of the loop. And also which type of output would it like the system to generate, whether it will be a more advisory output in the form of a report, or perhaps a more authoritative report in the form of a risk score. It is highly recommendable that the government will try to develop the system in-house rather than outsource it. This would allow for better optimization of the system. It also will provide for accountability. It will allow the government to keep the data internally rather than outsource it, and exert better control over its operation and design and operation later on. Of course, this is a limitation. Not every government can have this expertise in-house. Very important in the design and adaptation stage to include the social welfare clients who are the target population in the design, and also the professional operators, the social workers themselves. The last stage is the post-adoptive stage, where it's very important or highly recommendable to keep human in the loop It can also be keeping human over the loop in terms of monitoring over the operability of the system and proactively perhaps seeking for various problems and tackling them before the system is being implemented over a long period of time. The second one is formulating various control systems, including periodic auditing and other forms of evaluation in an ongoing manner. That is along the period of implementation of this or the working of this system. And lastly, what is important is for the government to set up an appeal mechanism and provide notice for the citizens that such an appeal mechanism in fact exists that can offer appropriate redress and help serve as a sort of an address for individuals adversely affected by ADM outputs or ADM decisions, and allow them to challenge those systems, possibly or preferably before those will go into effect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very interesting and important topic and presentation, and for sharing your thoughts with us. And without further ado, I'll give the floor to Mrs. Limor Shmerling Magazanik. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Just 1 second. Let's get ready. Sorry. Don't see my slides. Oh, okay, I think we're almost there. Okay. Anna, can you verify that you can see my slide?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, I think this needs to be a little. Okay. So thank you, Jacques, for the invitation. It's wonderful being here, and this opportunity to participate in this wonderful series is very much appreciated. And I'd like to make a few short comments after Sivan's fascinating presentation. And I have to say that every time I listen to her, she has new and informative insights and always updates into new examples of what's happening around the world. So it was wonderful again to hear Sivan. I would like to connect this issue of AI specifically to the public service and to the duties of administrative law that the public service is required to adhere to. So firstly, just to say that decision-making technology, when implemented into the public service, as Sivan mentioned, brings specific benefits, but also specific challenges stemming from these administrative law duties. It's also noteworthy to remember that governments are usually the major drivers of the acceptance of technology, in both giving it credibility and in supplying an environment for large-scale proof of concepts. In the case of AI, governments also hold vast amounts of rich data that is typically managed to some extent with an identity anchor. So governments are very attractive also for this reason for AI model development and proof. So for the success of this private-public collaboration, it's key, this success is key to the advancement of AI technology. And I'd like to start just briefly in mentioning how we look at public administration management. And we used to describe the old public administration and to view public administration as a model of hierarchy, of a vertical control, according to which the state, through the public service, is the sole supplier of public goods. And this paradigm has shifted and changed, obviously, quite a while ago into the new public management, which challenges the state's exclusivity as a public service provider to the citizens by combining the business sector and the third sector as suppliers in order to create competitiveness, increase or achieve economic efficiency in the operation of the public systems. In Israel, for example, specifically in the welfare services, the Ministry of Welfare has outsourced many services through local municipalities and through nonprofits who are working in the social welfare sphere. And this ecosystem of social services is very much a mix of private sector, industry, NGO, and government and local municipalities working together to provide those services. And the outsourcing of public services to the private sector, these privatizations, as well as the citizen participation in public service processes, are an expression of the new paradigm that is emerging in the field of public service, and that is the new public governance. And when we look at the new public governance, technology is a very key element of achieving this type of evolved and hopefully better type of public administration. So the new public governance is based on four main elements: an inclusive policy process that expresses a waiver of the state hegemony in the field, a comprehensive cooperation between the public sector, private sector, third sector, nonprofits, and citizens. It also means the positioning of the citizen, the public service user, at the center. And by them being actively participating in the design and evaluation of the public service, we aim to achieve a much better ecosystem for all. And these elements lead to the improvement of the service and the stimulation of innovation in it. There's also the comprehensive collaboration in long-term relationships, and this also covers procurement of technology, and the centrality of technology, mainly information and communication technologies and storage and processing of big data, as part of this very crucial new paradigm, and also as a generator of change and progress. And we've seen this past year during COVID how digital transformation was essential in order to maintain social distancing, and was driven in many places as part of the mitigation of the pandemic. So the implementation of AI or algorithmic decision-making tools in government services can bring improvement in adherence to duties of public agencies. And I'm not going to mention all of those duties. I'm just going to touch lightly upon three of them. So public agencies specifically are required to treat people equally. Equal treatment is one of the fundamentals of public service. Sivan has told us that through AI and using algorithmic decision-making, we can better our equal treatment of citizens. So for example, instead of having social workers or public officials in various ministries, various divisions, various municipalities make individual decisions that may arrive at different conclusions pertaining to people under the same circumstances, and AI algorithmic decision-making can uniform the decisions that are made and create better equality for all of the consumers, all of the citizens of these services. Reasonableness is also something that can be made better using algorithmic decision-making, since we in advance create the process and the data on which decisions are being made, and therefore we can reason with decisions in a flawless manner and avoid some of the perhaps bias, or perhaps just irrational decisions that individuals may sometimes make. The efficiency and the provision of services to the public may be much better. And this development may also lead to the entrance of public administration norms into the private sector, since we will have the private sector participating in this collaboration in creating this technology implementation. But at the same time, when looking into the particular challenges of such integration, we should also consider the potential difficulties in the administrative responsibility and accountability for AI and its outputs. So these are a few of the other duties of public agencies that create a conflict or a potential conflict with AI. So legal powers and a delegation of authority is something that is crucial, essential, and fundamental in public administration. So we must ask ourselves whether extra-governmental outsourced bodies, algorithmic decision-making system providers, can be subject to administrative law norms that apply to the public service, or be able to provide compliance with such norms. Will they serve reasonableness, transparency, privacy, due process, equal protection when seemingly performing a public function? So the duties of public agencies, as shown in the legal powers and delegation of authority, mean that an authority can exercise only so much power as is granted to it by law. An action of the authority is intra-virus, is okay, can pass when it falls within the limits of the power it holds, but ultra-virus if it goes outside this limit. In new public management, it is possible for a public body to exercise auxiliary authority for the government, for the public body. That requires it retains its discretionary power. The government must maintain the power of discretion, its responsibility and accountability. Therefore, an outsourcing activity will be considered intra-virus, falling within the limits of the power granted to it. So an auxiliary authority, an algorithmic decision, not an algorithmic decision-making tool, but maybe an algorithmic support tool, assisting the administrative authority in exercising its powers, will retain the administrative responsibility and discretionary powers. As far as an algorithmic decision-making system correlates with exerting discretion, does it use, in the context of government services, mean a delegation of administrative powers and duties to private bodies? Because that will already be an infringement of the administrative law. So does the government, through contracting out, privatizing these types of services, constitute or amount to an ultra-virus act? Namely, an act that exceeds authority, legal power, since it does not exercise its duty in discretion. This is a very fundamental question that needs to be addressed before AI can be fully implemented in government services. So would this delegation of discretionary powers be unlawful and therefore void, and potentially be able to be attacked by petitions against it? That's a very important question for governments who are considering buying and using these types of systems. So does the administrative authority deviate from its role as a public trustee, or will it be using AI in a manner that is assimilated within its use of powers? Another example, the second one, is the due process. So government, in making decisions, is obliged to go through a due process. It has a duty to give grounds for decisions made concerning people. It has a duty to allow people's right to be heard and to make arguments against the decision that may be unwanted. How can this be fully supported when we've just heard and that we know that explainability is limited, may be limited in AI? So if we are not fully able to explain how a decision has been made and argue on what grounds it has been made, how can we make it available to people in order for them to exercise their rights and for the government and authorities and agencies to be compliant with their duties. And transparency connects to this as well, in the sense that how can we meaningfully provide it in such collaborations, and how will we be able to demonstrate transparency of algorithms when they are IP of private companies maybe. So this is a short analysis, or a short several examples of how AI and administrative law, AI use in government services needs to be thought out quite carefully. It's obvious that there are many benefits to this connection, and that it's crucial that we better understand it in order to move forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share my thoughts, and I give it back to you, Anna.
Thank you very much, Limor. I'm taking over. This is a duo with Anna. That's fascinating. I think to put this discussion into the broader perspective that you just described is extremely interesting. Also, the change of paradigm with new public governance. I was thinking that perhaps we should add digital into that, new public digital governance, and to see what that may imply. As you describe, and I'm sure there will be an interesting discussion. But now let us turn to our second commentator, Diego Kuonen. You have the floor, and I guess you also have a few slides to share with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jacques. Thanks, Sivan, for this interesting presentation. I'm not a lawyer, so I will not question or give you thoughts about legal stuff, but also taking into account what Limor said are very important elements. I would like also to activate some sort of mindset changing, and also starting a little bit with a lot of things, starting with some things. I share the screen now. Basically, Sivan started with these 4 challenges. And when I received in advance, it's the luxury if you comment, you receive in advance the presentation. So I came across this article she put there where she had these 4 challenges basically, which are due to AI. And as you clearly see, she scrapped a little bit the surface and she went into several details. But I think, as you already see here, there are technical stuff, there's societal stuff, there's regulation, there are ethics. And at the end of the day, it's always the same game. You do something and you give it to someone. Somebody produces it and somebody consumes it. And this supplier demand thing which is going on is exactly the same happening with what comes out of this AI system, etc. This means all over this place here, if you look basically, is really the point to make AI is a team sport. And this is things I like also about this things we have here. It's not about law, it's not about computer science, it's not about data science. It's really a team sport. It's interdisciplinary. And currently what I see also a little bit by consulting Swiss government, there is this huge demand, let's reinvent the wheel because there's something new. Okay, but there are teams who did similar things in the past, because at the end of the day, it's a very simplistic human thing we have. We want to understand something about something. In the case of the presentation, Sivan put it in place, really the center was this digital warfare state. So we want to get an understanding of this. So you have 2 possibilities. You can make a huge literature review and look at hundreds of books, or you have the possibility to get some understanding by using data, by learning from data. But at the heart, you want to understand something. Why you want to understand something? Because somewhere is a problem. So at the end of the day, it's about problem solving. So AI is not about technology, it's an entire process. And in this process, at some point, you will use a thing called algorithm, which is a statistical model. You will use at some point a legal idea, ethical issues, but it's a whole process where you want to solve problems which exist in society, because it should be, and this is, I'm fully in line with Limor, at the end of the day, and I'll show you at the end some insights, it should be for public good if you're speaking for the government. So there are societal issues which need solutions. And it's about, at the end of the day, it's a complete process. And I think this is the first mind shape you have to understand, that it's a process, and we want to learn something about the phenomenon under study. In this case, we put wonderful examples from what did go well, what did not go well, what are the challenges in this world of social welfare. But it's really about continuous improvement at the end of the day. You come up with a solution to a problem, you learn more about the problem, you try to improve, you try to look that it's not making harm to humans. So it has to be human-centric. So this is the new hype going on in the AI community. Humans have to be at the heart. But if you just think about humans are always at the heart of this process. Let's look once a typical problem definition problem. You start somewhere with a problem. You go for a solution. Then you think about, okay, let's get this data here. Let's explore this data. And at some point, you apply these fancy AI algorithms. So things called deep learning, and the mathematics are from the 1970s. So they're not so modern as you may think. And then something comes out and you want to use this to reformulate your problem. And you start going into this continuous improvement game where you start. But basically what you see here on this cycle, if you understand, this is nothing new. This, you can go back, I can provide you references, come back to the 30s, 20s of the last century. You had people at Shepherd, you had Deming who put this in place about problem solving, continuous improvement. And that's why this really puts in place now with what I started, the teamwork, the interdisciplinary, and that at the heart of everything is a problem you want to understand. And now you have two possibilities how you can tackle this. You can go and look for fires. So you had wonderful examples, Sivan, in your presentation. This did not go where this did go. So two possibilities to distinguish a fire. First, you put water and the fire's away. Or you go to the root causes of the fire. And there you will see the governments come important, because there has to be responsibilities which need to be defined at some point. There are things which come in play like accountability, etc. But what you also see here in this nice cycle, basically, this is fully human-centric. A human defines the problem. A human thinks about which data to use. A human thinks about who does it, this data preparation. A human decides what to do. A human decides here. A human decides in which system it will go. A human decides how to measure success. Humans are everywhere. This is already completely human-centric, if you see it in this point. Because without human as guides, current AI is not more capable than a computer without software. And it starts with a problem, and then you think about which data could use to solve the problem, to come with a first solution to the problem. You need data. So you need trustworthy data. And in all the discussion I see going on AI, data quality, yeah. We need trustworthy AI. But trustworthy AI without trustworthy data is nothing. You wouldn't jump in a swimming pool with cold water, would you? No, I don't think you. And so this is complete, again, this is not an issue, because this is a team sport. So you need also guys who know what data quality is. That's why I don't like in the name AI. There's nothing artificial about AI. It's inspired by humans, it's created by humans, and it impacts humans. And it's really this impacting human in government. You have to be very, very careful, because you have to think about it before you click the button. You have to think about, when you define the problem, how this can impact. So you have to put in ways like safe belts in case there's an issue. Who takes responsibility? Who's accountable for? And nowadays you have this idea, well, we have this data transformation, so we have to go. There are tools, there are techniques, we have nerds all over the planet. So let's go very, very quickly on these topics. And this is not the way it will work. This may work in the private sector, but I don't think if you touch the public, and that's why there will be at some point mistrust. There are other topics which you scrapped a little bit the surface. Unfortunately, one word, which is the word black box. And I can tell you, a traditional statistical simple linear regression for a citizen is a black box. So we have to stop speaking about these things called black box explainable AI. This is completely nonsense. Why? Because it's a complete process. The process has to be transparent. The process has to be explained to someone. Every steps in the process, what's going on. The citizens don't have to understand the algorithms. Even I think professors of machine learning don't understand their algorithms. But they see it as a problem-solving process. And this is where I think all things like bias, etc., are biased in AI. AI doesn't have any biases. Humans decide which technology, humans decide which problem to apply to, human decided which data to use. So all biases come from human. Human decided basically everything in this system. So if I go a little bit more technical, I don't want to go technical here, but here you saw, if you start here, you have this, if you see now there's a problem-solving process, and here you have it like in this sphere. Now you have to put this somewhere, engineer into a system. And this is basically, you start somewhere, you gather some data, you explore it, you integrate, you model it. And this is the algorithms. Algorithms are in this little block here. But then you decide, okay, let's put into a software, which come to the policymakers, which affect citizens. So basically what you see here, this is how you engineer the thing, the process, not the algorithm. It's a complete process. Somebody has to do the coding then, somebody has to think about continuous testing, somebody has to put in place the monitoring, it's really tracking, there's no harm going on. Somebody has to do this, somebody has to do this. There are other people who have to check, etc. This is transparent, this is explainable. This is what AI is about. It's not about having a thing here, an algorithm, which by definition cannot be like this, because a definition of black box, a traditional statistical method is a black box, not for a statistician, but for others. So overall here, we have some requirements, and that's why I like in this figure here, which I came across last week. So you have a lot about things we want from it. Because there is a user of the outputs. So we have to carefully think about at the beginning, what are our customers? Okay, customers are citizens. Okay, customers are social citizens wish this and this. So we have to think about the customer before we start. And we have to guarantee that also things like data quality come in place, there's the continuous validation coming in place, security integrity, and now comes an important point. We have by design to put in ethical things. By design have to put in data privacy things. And this basically resonates what I said before. Think before you compute. Think before you apply the algorithm. Because if you do this correctly, you will be prepared what's happened. So you will gain trust from the citizens. Because you carefully try to find a dialogue with the citizens, what they want. If they see an added value, you do it. It's an explainable and transparent way. So at the end of the day, unfortunately, a lot of discussions currently are on the output. This is the fires where you see, and then they go one step back. Okay, the fire becomes of this algorithm here, which is in the middle. But I think we have to go one step back if you want to make this serious and make sustainable and not harm our citizens. So we have to go one step back. So we have really to see us as a process of continuous improvement. So this brings me basically to the point Limor put stress on is the public thing here. I can tell you, because my main activity is not the University of Geneva, so I'm consulting the government. And what was decided at the government level, there is now a data science competence center which was put in place. And I can put you afterwards in the link. So this is operating since this is Swiss National Data Science Competence Center. And this is put, and now you think you would not be surprised, sorry, it's put by the Swiss Council, Federal Council to the Federal Statistical Office. Yeah, these are these guys, since 160 years, they built the trust. They know what does mean to have transparency, explainability, and all this stuff, because they had it to have create this dialogue. And if you now look a little bit, what is the mission? This is data science for the public good, for the whole of Switzerland. Now, let me just go one step deeper. What are the core values? These are basically what's called a code of conduct in official statistics. So they follow code of conduct. Also, the Israel office are included here. They have United Nations principles. And what are the core values? Data protection, security, non-discrimination, explainability, transparency, reproducibility, neutrality, objective, ethical treatment, etc., and public confidence. So everything what basically you both put on the table, which is needed, are at the core of official statistics within their code of conduct. They have ethical guidelines, internationally agreed upon, and this was also the reason I think the Swiss Federal Council gave the mandate to the Swiss Federal Statistical Office and not to another office in the Swiss Confederation. Now, what has this to do with AI? This has to do with basically the definition of AI. And here, data science is a problem-solving process and a process of continuous improvements. It's the same slide I think I had on the slide. Basically, I'm not responsible for this definition. And here you have data science methods, including methods for machine learning and the field of artificial intelligence. So AI are methods which are used within the complete problem-solving process. So at the end, it's AI for public good. Now what I can share you this here. This week there was a press release. I don't know whether Jacques and others you saw it. There was a press release that there's a collaboration now, the Federal Institute of Technologies, and the FSO, the Federal Statistical Office, the foreign sources to data science and artificial intelligence for public good. So this is, I think, all thing Limor put at the end, what's needed. So this is something which is built now a little bit in Switzerland, really this for public good. And the Data Science Competence Center will really then try to, with her core values being affiliated to the Swiss Federal Statistical Office, really try to take this market. This also means if you go this way, and basically this will not be the fast way. This will be the way, I think, where you have to explain to a lot of decision makers and policy makers why does it take so long? Because this is the slow way, but this is the sustainable way. This is how you cannot destroy the trust citizens have. This is how you can make them part of this team. And I think whether I started, they have to be part of the team, and in the team that it's also on the academic side as well. So this is this interdisciplinary team, and citizens, public good citizens, they have policymakers also have to be part of the team. So thanks again then for this very interesting presentation, Sivan. There were some resources which I really liked also because I had the slides in advance, and this was everything for me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Diego. A lot of food for thought, also interesting reaction, including from the perspective of what's happening here in Switzerland. I'm sure that Sivan and also perhaps Limor have comments to make on those comments. So Sivan, please.
Okay, thank you, Limor and Diego, for your comments. It was very interesting. I'm familiar with Limor's angle here, so I'll address some of what Diego said. So I thought that your presentation or your comments were sort of a mirror image to my own presentation, especially when it comes to, well, a large portion of my presentation was dedicated to challenges and ethical difficulties and limitations, and where I, in fact, introduced AI, or the introduction of AI into our lives, as a problem, and you chose to present it as a problem-solving tool rather than a problem. And I think this has made it all the more tangible that AI is here, and it's here to stay, and it's part of our life, and we need to learn how to get used to this kind of presence in our life. Another thing is, you talked, I think there needs to be perhaps a closer discourse or exchange of views and perhaps even explanations between academics and perhaps policymakers in the fields of law and ethics, and others in the fields of science, data science, and other technological areas. Since there seems to be some sort of incoherence or a gap between the way we perceive things from the legal and ethical perspective and the way that scientists perceive those things, especially around the explainability of AI. Now, 2 sessions ago, when we took part in the AITPT session, I don't remember his name, Francois something, perhaps. Perhaps Jacques can say his name. He in fact said that the challenge of explaining AI is an unachievable task, that we have to get used to the fact that at least AI in certain stages will not be explainable, and we need to get to work our way around it. And you, Diego, are saying, in fact, that there is no black box problem and that there is no real problem of explaining the inner workings of the algorithm, at least to people who are professionals in the field. So I'm a bit confused here, but I'm certain that I'm part of the group to whom AI will never be thoroughly explainable. I mean, I have no grasp of things. I'm quite technologically illiterate, well, at least to some extent, and it will take, I mean, a very skilled science professional to explain the inner workings of the algorithm to me in a way which will make sense. So I think we need to sort of to bridge the gap here between those 2 disciplines.
So I see that Diego has raised his hand, so perhaps he wants to replicate, perhaps, and then of course we should open. Diego?
Yeah, maybe not replicate, maybe just for me, I think we're speaking the same language, Sivan. The big difference is you're still speaking about algorithms, you speak about tools. I speak about the process, the complete process, where at some point you apply technology, you apply the tools. And where, for example, the comments which were done by Francois, I think, because it was on YouTube, so I looked at it yesterday. He puts in place the tool on itself. I'm speaking about the process. It's like cooking a recipe. You say, I need this ingredients, then I put the ingredients together, then I do this and this. And at some point you use your recipe, which is like the algorithm, but the complete process coming from what comes in with the definition of the problem, how it can impact citizens, for example, all the different steps. This process has to be explainable and has to be transparent. At every step, you have to know what came in and what came out. So this is basically system thinking. This is process thinking. And I think this is the point. So maybe, and you, if I forgot, so this could happen, because these things existed before AI. This is an old way of looking at things. So I don't think there's a bridge in terminology, and I fully agree on this, because it's interdisciplinary, it's a team sport, and the problem we're facing now everywhere, every discipline has its own language. So there's no common language, there's no common, and there's a lot of misunderstanding exactly on this. And so this is just kind of take you from my experience, also what we do in Switzerland, we try to federate the terminology on what is an AI system. So we had the luxury last year, the first time in a decision of the Federal Council was a definition, what's an AI system, what's an AI decision. So it was the first time it was included in an official definition for the Swiss government. Now everybody needs to use this, because now there is one. And you start speaking about what is the issue. But so you have to first have the common language, and this is something, some matching is done. I think something like the Digital Law Center certainly could also help to make like a terminology management of terms, because I see that the collaborative aspect you put on the table together with Limor and with a background with me and other people I know also from everywhere. This is then we have a team.
Okay, so if I just react to this last comment, okay, I understand. I now understand the nuanced comment you made. So what, in fact, I'm referring to is whether, from a practical legal point of view, whether being able to explain the process as a whole will be enough to challenge an ADM system or an AI-related harm. Will I not be required to be able to explain or challenge or address the algorithm itself when I come and say that I was adversely affected by an ADM decision, and will the process itself will not be too general for this purpose? But I leave it, hanging in the air. It's just food for thought here.
Maybe just take this point. It depends the question, who did it? Who did the ADM system? Which what principle he had in mind? And I think it may be a little bit a fairy tale I put you on the table before what's going in Switzerland. If you follow these principles, this ADM system should be transparent at every step. But now the thing I'm seeing also in government and the companies, they buy in software. This is a thing you put at the earlier of your presentation. And they don't know what's going on in the system. They don't know how this thing, what's called engineered at some point. So they buy it in as a black box where data comes in, a flag comes out. And then you have to ask, how much trust do you have in such a system? For me, this is a question of trust at every step. So it's about really, if you want to do this, you may maybe never have a system because it will be so transparent, so explainable, but you have to find some compromise. And this is what we try in Switzerland with so-called minimal viable products, also in the industry, where you try to get a first feedback from the customer. This means before you go full in with such a system, you define some, for example, citizens who want to test it and they know it could be nonsense, could be discriminating, etc. But they provide you feedback. And so you need to very quickly in this process having these feedback loops. Unfortunately, I see what's going on, or not only in the Swiss, also in other European governments. They buy in things because they see AI is software. AI is not software. It's not a fixed software you can buy like an Explorer if you want, and then you can do 20 years, you can use the same. Well, it has to continuously take into account the feedback from the environment, from the users. And I think this is the complete understanding. If once you accept this, you see legal issues everywhere, you see ethical issues everywhere. So you see all issues you put in every of the steps.
Thank you, Diego. Any reaction from Limor, perhaps, or Sivan?
Yes, thank you, Shadrach. A few thoughts. This really is turning into a fascinating conversation because this is something that we've been talking about for quite a long time, this issue of explainability and language and interdisciplinary. And I very much agree with Diego that this is a team sport. And I've been working in law and technology for the past 12 years. And it's really difficult sometimes to go through these conversations because sometimes, as Diego mentioned and Sivan as well, definitions are not always clear on both ends or all ends of the conversation. So I very much think that, for example, legal professionals in this branch of law need to be quite proficient in technology or sufficiently proficient in technology, at least at the basic level that allows that conversations with data scientists and engineers and others to be more productive. So I think as an educational task, that goal, I think that is something crucial to law faculties around the world. The second thing that was, I just want to mention something about this last point. There's a current open legal proceeding here in Israel around the tax authority and a business that is objecting to the amount of tax that is required to be paid, and during the proceeding has asked to audit the tax authority's algorithm that calculates the tax. And this has gone into a fascinating, quite lengthy process that we're still looking forward to see how the courts will decide here. And this is an argument that really invokes these questions, and also the question of how proficient is a judge coming from the legal profession residing in such a case, and what type of professionals can be consultants or can be brought in to give professional opinions over this case, and how will the judge be able to decide between maybe two contradictory algorithmic auditing opinions by professionals of a data science or statistics profession. These are huge challenges facing already being met by the legal profession and the business climate. So I think this is another very important thing to maybe continue to think about. And I particularly liked what Diego said about the slow type of cycle, or the slow process of a government that is thoughtfully wanting to implement AI through a due process and using best practices, and being accused of being too slow. And this is a conflict that, again, has been with law and technology for quite a few decades, because technology is very fast, and the tech sector and the startup sector are very fast moving, and government is slower. And indeed, in order to work responsibly and be accountable for the implementation of these very advanced technologies in government, we need to take our time. Something that public opinion and the media are quite critical of when government takes its time. And even if I think we should also remember, and that's not a reason to make it faster or less responsible, but AI is currently an arena of national strategies of very large powers who are all racing to be dominant at AI. There are different cultures in different superpowers and nations. It's both China and the US and the EU, and even small Israel. Our government has also published a strategy how we will be world leaders in AI, and that doesn't go well with being slow. And I think that we should remember that this is also a very strong driving force, growth-driven, economics-driven, and geopolitical in driving AI towards some finish line of who's going to be the world leader and the dominant power in AI. And this really influences the ability of governments to take it slow and to be responsible. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Limor. That's a very interesting and much broader perspective, which we definitely have to take into account to see this global geopolitics of data and AI, which must definitely be taken into consideration in this discussion. Let me now open the floor for discussion. Are there any questions or comments from anyone? Please do. So Hadi Ashkari, you have the floor.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm from Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society in Berlin. Thank you to all the speakers. It's a very interesting topic, and we've kind of been thinking about this topic, and what I want to ask about explainability and transparency and the link to open source. So do you think it's possible for governments to just ask that any AI used in kind of public projects be open source? Because I understand there is kind of a tension with the commercial aspect there, but I think like everything that government does is open, like all government decisions are open to kind of investigation by citizens or experts or companies, by anybody. So why wouldn't these algorithms be open? And if we do that, then a lot of these problems around explainability and transparency, they kind of actually kind of disappear, because there'll be enough people who can make sense of it collectively. Thank you. And
Thank you very
question
much.
is to whoever, yeah.
Okay. Sivan, perhaps as our speaker today, and then Diego. Sivan.
I think it's a very important and a very good question, a very good point to be raised here. But I think you've answered it at least partly yourself. The problem or the tension with the private sector, the issue of commercial confidentiality and proprietary interest in the algorithm or in the system itself are a major problem. It has also been challenged in court in various proceedings, and sometimes it has failed. This is the subjective opacity or algorithmic opacity I was referring to earlier. I quite agree with you that it should be a part of a general policy of transparency regarding governmental actions. But as we can see here, at least in Israel, with regards to all sorts of COVID moves, plays, and this governmental decisions, it is not always easy for the government to be transparent in a way that evokes trust within the citizens with regards to various decisions made. I think that this is a serious obstacle in the way of transparency, and I do know that various ethical codes being formulated do encourage, in fact, the open source of algorithmic in order to avoid this opacity, to encourage transparency and trust. And I think this would hopefully be the way going forward, but private vendors will probably want to be compensated for this kind of demand by government, and that might limit governmental outsourcing options at times.
Thanks very much, Diego. Would you like to react to that?
Yeah, maybe react at several levels. So the first level is, what do you want to open source? The algorithm, the data, the system it's deployed. So it has to be clear what will be outsourced in this process, and also why it should be outsourced. That somebody can check the code, that somebody can check whether it's reproducible. This will not work because then you have to put also the data, otherwise it will not be reproducible. Just see that you see which packages are used or which modules. Okay, you have the source code. And I think now this brings me back to the question, who does it and what are his code of doing it? And if you go back, this is basically the goal which is followed, the things which come out of this competence center or data science, which also makes AI systems and stuff like this in the future, is really, if you follow this code of conduct which exists from official statistics, this is how you work. This is your code of conduct. It has to be documented. It has to be transparent. It has to be shared to other ones. It has to be put somewhere, but it's clear if you take now Switzerland, the idea is clear that everything related to individual projects will be, if data protection allows, or there are other permissions, will be documented in a transparent and made available to the public, because this is for public good at the end of the day. But this does not mean there won't be any data sharing of microdata on the individual Swiss citizens and stuff like this. And why is this the case? Because the core values are at the heart. And this is the code of conduct of official statistics, which is governed on a European level, on the national level. And this makes things very slow. And the other point, there are cantons in Switzerland which had laws now where everybody in the canton administration have to go for open source. It's clear you can brute force it in, But what will then happen? There's no suppliers of these things. There are a lot of small products around, but there's no industrialized solution which can be deployed at scale. And this is, you always have to find the compromise of both worlds, where the commercial are very good with AI, they are very good at the deployment and scalability issues. With respect to running the algorithms, with respect to having access to the data. And open source can help at some point. You can make transparent some elements, but for me, this is also a strategy. If you want to go for open source, then you follow some core values.
Thank you very much. Does that somehow address your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are interesting points that are being raised. Yeah, and it's more of a discussion than a question. So
absolutely, yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
I think it's interesting, and I'm gonna just share, but perhaps already some of you are following that closely, I'm sure, about what's happening at the EU level with respect to the draft Digital Services Act, where you also see this pressure for algorithmic transparency for platforms. I think it's a very important point, and let me just briefly come back to what you said, Sivan, also in your presentation, which was also alluded to in the discussion now about this lack of technological expertise by governments. I think this is something that we face, and we've been facing, will continue to face. And this is a discussion which goes beyond the discussion that we're having here. So how can we make sure that public authorities do have the tools, also the technological tools, in order to address and make sure that the values on the basis of which they're supposed to work, and as you reflected them, Limor, earlier, which are very important, can be implemented adequately. And I was wondering when, that's again more a comment than a question, when you mentioned, Limor, this new paradigm in terms of new public governance, I was adding a few minutes ago this addition of new public digital governance, and you were saying that this is characterized by a cooperation between the public sector, the private sector, the third, that is the non-profit sector, and citizen. And I was wondering, in the light of the discussion that we're having now, whether we should perhaps put first or put equally the public sector and the private sector, and within the private sector insist on the tech sector, because they are, at least to some extent, in the driver's seat, because they develop the technology. And this is, to me, exactly the challenge that we have to face, this lack of technological expertise, and the issue, which is hard to solve, of finding a balance between, and coming back to what you said, Sivan, in your presentation, the due process rights and algorithmic transparency on the one hand, and as you mentioned them and also refer to them in the discussion, on the other hand, the vendor's property rights and trade secrets. So again, this is not a discussion which is limited to what we're discussing here. This has been also taking place in other contexts. But I'm sure this is something on which we have definitely to continue to work and try and see whether we can find ideally global solutions.
So if I may, Jacques, just to follow up on that, because I think you made a very important point, 2 points actually. So one thing is that it's true that government has a dual role here. It's at the same time both a potential buyer and user of new technologies, and also a regulator that is creating the oversight over the use of those technologies. And whether government, when buying and using technology, adheres to its own regulations is not a given. I think one example that you can see, and it's interesting, you mentioned the Digital Services Act. And I would add to that the Digital Markets Act and the Data Governance Act and the new EU strategy for data governance, which I would say is maybe more of an open data law, and the GDPR in the background, and this whole mix of laws that have objectives that are not necessarily aligned all the time, and that are creating new regulation bodies. So the Digital Services Act is aiming to establish new regulation bodies to be enforcing that, and that is parallel to the data protection authorities under the GDPR, and potentially also other regulatory bodies under the Digital Markets Act. And if you look at the EDPS recent comments to the Data Governance Act, so the Data Governance Act, the one that is aiming to create an EU single data market and data spaces in various verticals to support development and to support innovation in agriculture, in education, in finance, in health, etc. So the EDPS, the European Data Protection Supervisor, who are the ones who oversight the member states' implementation of GDPR, have put forth an opinion to the Data Governance Act that it's very much lacking, and that objects to many of the notions and ideas that are potentially proposed to be legislated there. And I think that really exemplifies that within government, we should always remember that government doesn't have just one voice. It's usually not just one body, one entity. There are different powers, different voices, different opinions, different missions. And when we're talking about AI in general, so the perspective about AI regulation and AI use by different government bodies may be different. And it's a good question. At the end of the day, I think whomever wins is the one with the most political capital. And that takes us back to politics.
Thanks very much, Limor. I just shared, I think this is the document that you alluded to in the chat, which I must say I haven't had a chance to read yet, but this is certainly also fascinating to keep in mind, as you mentioned, that there are various players within the public sector and potentially different interests and potentially even conflicting interests to some extent. Diego?
Yeah, maybe just that I'm not open the box of the Pandora, but just we also have to think at one day why the governments want to do it. This means what? Use these AI systems. And I see currently in Switzerland, at least, to see there is the processes are inefficient. And if you then re-ask question, you see at the end of the day, it's about cutting jobs. So we can, this is then now the political thing. So you can have them, and I had experience with 2 projects in the Swiss government, which were very wonderful AI systems. How you from the school book with explainability, transparency, everything. And then there were 2 performant. And this means if they would have given the green line to put them in like in a production environment, this would mean that some jobs will be lost at the end of the day. And I think this is then, I think we're speaking here about putting together at the end of the chain is the citizen. And it's clear I'm speaking about demographic societies. The citizen needs to have trust in the government. And if you want to put the citizens in the center of developing these systems, we have first to speak to them, and we have to make this communication with them for why the government wants to do this. And not just, oh, hey guys, now there's this automated digital process, there's a chatbot here, and okay, nobody uses it, so basically all money is lost. And I think this is complete different discussion now, but at the end of the day, the system solves a problem. And this is exactly the point. A problem which so far did take too long, was not easy to find a solution to, And we are once again in this problem-solving game. And I think there we have to think, who gets the solution? Is it the citizen? Is it the policymaker? Is it this and this? So it's a very wide discussion.
Absolutely, it's a very wide discussion, and we have a few minutes left. And also, we wanted, and I want to make it possible for our participants also to join the discussion. Anyone wishing to intervene? Yes, Naslama, please.
Thank you. It's very, very interesting, all the discussion. How can we explain that I'm a Swiss physician and I'm trying to implement digitalization in my corporation since several decennies with where we stand actually in Switzerland? How is a government, a constitutional democracy, which is in fact a real direct democracy, so backlogging in digitalization? How can you explain that we were against this digital identity, which was very well explained, and how can we overcome it with all this that was said this last hour?
Is the question referred to a particular democracy, the Swiss one, or
now
because we have a different view?
Effectively, because we go slow, we go broad. It was already said by all of you, we go in all the strata, federal government, cantonal government, patient association, private-public partnership, and we are lagging behind, in my opinion, at least.
But Diego Kuonen has the answer and hopefully the solution. So
no, I have the answer. The answer is there's a data illiterate political system. The citizens are not data literate enough. So it's about data literacy is the answer. This is something you cannot just change now with digital transformation. A lack of data literacy in the society exists in hundreds of years. So it's an old thing, and this problem was never solved so far. There was no, then you look what's going on in Switzerland, we have this educational system, we have a new educational, so in the kindergarten they have, and what they learn tools. Before they have to learn tools, they have to learn a way to critically ask the question, why does this app need this and this access? Where do the data come from? I'm just speaking about critical thinking, which is completely tool-driven now. And this has to do with education. So that's the wrong education of going work. So we have really to prepare, say, the next generations. I could give you a 4-hour speech. I won't do. I had the chance, and I put it in the chat, to supervise a white paper with Paris 21, which came out this week, on really how to advance data literacy for the post-pandemic world. I really invite you read it. You will also refine ethical dimensions. You will find legal dimensions and all stuff like this. And you will see this is a little bit, this is at the heart. This is where the problem is. Digital transformation, AI are solutions with tools which could be used to make this better. This is my point of view.
I think that the problem is universal. But the speed of adoption or customization of one's health system, education system, governance to AI is country specific or jurisdiction specific. So I think we can all sympathize with what you just said, and I think we can all agree that digital and technological education should start at a very early age in order to provide our children, future citizens of society with appropriate tools for this digitalized AI-guided age. And each country does it at its own pace and with its own limitations, I suppose.
Jacques, maybe just one more thought about this. When looking at some countries' ability to respond to the COVID pandemic and others in the sense of digitized health system, maybe this observation will be helpful. I think that Israel's relative success, at least in healthcare and vaccination, relied heavily on the fact that we have very advanced digital health records. And this is not necessarily only due to digital literacy. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we have a very centralized universal healthcare system, which was created by the government and by law. And we have 4 health management operators who are at the same time both the insurer and the health giver, and are obliged by law to give equal service to all of the population. And they have been investing in competing between each other over citizens and making themselves better. Also, digital services for the past 30 years. I think if you look at the United States, perhaps, and that is a model that may be similar to what you're describing in Switzerland, the decentralization, the federal system and the state system and the county system, plus the fact that healthcare is decentralized, insurers and health givers are divided, and there's no uniform universal healthcare management. And that also evolved into lack of high digital services and connectivity and being able to create linkage between health records. So perhaps it's a question of centralized versus decentralized, and the type of government services and how they are given to the public.
Absolutely agree, because we do things 26 times, actually, even more, I think.
Yeah, that's perhaps one aspect further is. Diego, perhaps a quick last comments before we shall wrap up.
Yeah, just to clarify, data literacy is not the same as digital literacy. I really would like you to take your time, if you're interested, look at the paper which came out yesterday, where you see a little bit also the differences. And that's why I also tell people data literacy comes first. And first means for us, it's too late. But for the next generation, it has to start in kindergarten. And this is what we started in Switzerland with a political appeal. And we went that with the Federal Council, and the feedback we get, Switzerland does already it, and they confuse this with digital literacy. And this is very important to think also about terminology. So we're basically where we were at the beginning. Okay, just to precise this, otherwise. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Diego. Sivan, would you like to have last words before we shall wrap up?
It was a very interesting discussion, and I think I've learned quite a lot. And I will look into the data literacy distinction, which you've just made, Diego, I promise. And I agree with everything that Limor has said, described about the differences between universal health systems and the ones described here. And I think this the way the discussion went just shows that there is a lot more to discuss and to learn, and the interdisciplinary nature of this this topic requires not only harmonization of certain terms, but also really a continuous exchange of opinions, so that we can benefit from each other in a reciprocal manner.
Thanks very much. I think there's a question which is on the chat that perhaps you can see a question, if I read it aloud, the question from a student of the interaction between law and, let me see, I've lost it now. between law and AI. I don't know if you can read it, and if anyone has a reaction to that from an
maybe I had a case with the Federal Tax Administration where there were laws on the taxes, and if you start doing the machine learning, etc., you have to guarantee comparability over time, and the laws were changing every time. So at the end of the day, you didn't have comparable data. So it's a very difficult task how to put the laws to match them, these legal rules, decoded directly in the design of the algorithms, because laws are changing and every algorithm assumes the future is like the past. So if it's a complete new role, you don't have data. So if it's very difficult, then you cannot just like back create some data with the new role. You have to be careful to think about when you define the problem. So this is why this is feasible, but it's complicated.
So the question as to whether we have reading suggestions on the chat. If you do have some suggestions, perhaps you can share them on the chat. So let me now wrap up without extending the session by thanking again our speakers, Sivan Tamir. Many thanks to you, Sivan. That was a fascinating presentation. Thanks also to you, Limor, Shmerling, Magazanik, which was great to have you, and so to hear your thoughts on this broader context. To you, Diego, Kuonen, also for even broadening in a bigger way and also transversal manner the discussion, and to all of you, to all the participants, for this very stimulating and dynamic session. Many thanks also to Anna Andreevich, with whom I organize these AITPT sessions. We very much look forward to welcoming you again to our next session, about which we will communicate shortly. In the meantime, I wish you all an excellent rest of the week and look forward to our next session. And I would invite, if you have a few minutes, Sivan, Limor, and Diego, perhaps to stay online and go in the breakout room. Thanks to all and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.